All right, let's get right into it. We're talking about the Save America Act. Now, this is a huge piece of legislation that just sailed through the House. And on paper, it looks like it has the votes to pass the Senate, too. But its fate is actually hanging by a thread, and it's all because of some pretty complicated rules and political chess.
Right? It seems like a simple question. If you've got the votes, you've got the votes. So what's the holdup? Well, the answer is anything but simple. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack here. Because this whole story, it's about way more than just one bill. It's really about the fundamental rules of how Washington, D.C. actually works. Or doesn't.
So first up, a bill on the brink. Before we get into all the procedural drama, we really need to understand what the Save America Act is and how it got to this make-or-break moment in the first place. Okay, so what's actually in this bill? It's officially known as H.R. 7296, and it basically does two big things. First, it would require you to show documentary proof that you're a U.S. citizen just to register to vote in a federal election. Second, it would mandate a photo ID to actually cast your ballot. Now, supporters will tell you these are just common-sense measures for election security, but opponents argue they could throw up some serious barriers, making it tougher for folks who are perfectly eligible to vote. And this version of the bill, it already passed the House back on February 11th. And when I say it passed, man, was it tight. The final vote was 218 to 213. Every single Republican voted for it, and they got one Democrat, Representative Henry Cuellar from Texas, to cross the aisle. That razor-thin vote, that's really a preview of the drama that was about to unfold. So the bill clears that first big hurdle. It makes its way across the Capitol building, from the House over to the Senate. And this, my friends, is where the real showdown is set to begin. Now look at this number, 50. That's the number of senators who are publicly on board with this bill. That's all 49 Republican co-sponsors plus Senator Susan Collins. And, in a 100-seat Senate, 50 votes plus the vice president coming in to break a tie, well, that's a majority. So case closed, right? The bill passes. Not so fast. And that brings us to Section 2, the 60-vote wall. Yeah, welcome to the U.S. Senate, where, believe it or not, simple math doesn't always get you the win. This bill is about to run smack into a huge procedural wall. Okay, so here's the deal. Passing a bill, yeah, that just takes a simple majority, 51 votes. But, and this is a huge but, ending debate on the bill requires you to break something called a filibuster. It's this old Senate tradition meant to force compromise. And to break it, you don't need 51 votes. You need a supermajority. You need 60. The Save America Act has 50 supporters, not 60. That 10-vote gap, that's everything. So the question you're probably asking right now is, well, if the rule is the problem, why don't they just change the rule? People call this the nuclear option, basically using a simple majority to blow up the old rules. So why not just do that? Well, because of this, the Senate Majority Leader John Thune has shut that idea down hard. He's made it absolutely crystal clear that changing the filibuster is not happening. So with 60 votes being impossible and changing the rules off the table, it really feels like this bill is dead on arrival. Or is it? And that leads us to the craziest part of this story, Section 3, the old school filibuster. There's this wild workaround being floated that would dig up a piece of Senate history. They're thinking about forcing a real Mr. Smith goes to Washington talking filibuster. Now, this is totally different from the filibuster you hear about today, where a senator can basically just send an email to signal they're blocking something. No. A talking filibuster is a genuine test of physical endurance. The opponents have to physically stand on the Senate floor and speak nonstop to keep their blockade alive. So how would this even work? Well, it's basically a high-stakes game of political chicken. The opponents would have to organize themselves, speaking in shifts around the clock. But if they slip up, if they yield the floor for any reason, even just a moment of silence, poof, debate's over. And the second the debate ends, the bill's supporters can pass it with that simple majority they already have. But trying this, there's a huge political price to pay. Forcing a talking filibuster would bring every other piece of Senate business to a screeching halt. We're talking about a move that could paralyze the entire chamber for days, maybe even weeks, with the whole country watching this one single fight. Which brings us to Section 4, 3 paths to passage. So when you put it all together, what are the actual ways this bill could still become law? It really comes down to 3 possible scenarios. Okay, so path number 1, and the one everyone's talking about, is they force the talking filibuster and the other side just can't keep it going. Path number 2, they could try to attach the SAVE Act to a must-pass bill later, something like a government funding package. And path number 3, the real long shot, is that they somehow find a different way to change the rules, even though leadership has already said no. But just when you think you've got the strategy figured out, the math gets tricky again. Because even that first path, the talking filibuster, which depends on having 50 rock-solid votes, well, it's just hit a pretty big snag.
And that complication is named Lisa Murkowski, the Republican senator from Alaska. She has come out and said she's against the bill. And her no vote is a huge deal because it means supporters might not even have the 50 votes they need to win after breaking a filibuster. Without her, they're sitting at 49, and that's not enough.
So Section 5, what happens next? Where in the world does this leave us? You've got a bill that passed the House, it has a potential majority in the Senate, but it's staring down a 60-vote requirement, a possible talking filibuster, and now a crack in its own support. So here's the big takeaway for you. The fight you're about to see in the coming weeks, it's not actually going to be about photo IDs or proof of citizenship. The debate you'll see on the news isn't really going to be about the contents of the Save America Act. Instead, what you're going to see is a bare-knuckle brawl over the rules of the Senate itself. It's a fight about power, about precedent, and about whether one party is willing to dust off a century-old procedure to get what it wants in a completely gridlocked system.
And that really leaves us with this final critical question. Will the fate of this major piece of 21st century law be decided not by what's popular or even what's in the bill, but by a procedural relic from a totally different era? The answer has huge implications that go way beyond just this one bill, and you can bet we'll be watching to see how it all plays out.